Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really provocative article that kicks off with the story of a promise. You see, 40 years ago, the Philippines famously overthrew a dictator, all in the name of democracy. But the source we're looking at today asks a pretty brutal question. Has that system actually worked? It goes on to make the bold claim that it hasn't just failed, it's actively hurting the nation. So let's unpack this really challenging argument, starting with that very first promise.
So here's how we're going to break down the article's argument. We'll start with that unfulfilled promise from 1986. Then, we're going to get into the weeds of its core theory, this idea of systemic decay. From there, we'll see how the author links all that to decades of internal conflict and what it calls a cultural decline. And finally, we'll get to the really radical structural changes it proposes as a way out, which leaves us with the big choice the article says the country is facing right now.
Okay, so the story starts back in 1986 with the People Power Revolution. You know, EDSA was this incredible moment of hope. A dictator was booted out without a huge civil war and democracy was back. But the article we're analyzing argues that this promise of a brand new day, well, it soured pretty fast, and it kicked off a 40-year cycle of disappointment and decay.
And when you look at this timeline of presidents since '86, the article paints a really grim picture. It runs through this whole chain of controversies from every single administration. We're talking everything from unfulfilled land reform in the Aquino era, to privatization deals under Ramos, Estrada's corruption scandals, Arroyo's contested election, another Aquinos fiscal issues, and of course, Duterte's bloody drug war. And what's the end result? Well, the ultimate irony, according to the author, is that this entire journey has led right back to where it started, with another Marcos in the presidential palace.
This brings us to the author's central, really hard-hitting question. After walking through that whole history, the article just bluntly asks the reader to justify this idea that democracy has been the country's salvation. And this question, it's not just for effect. It's the very question that kicks off the article's entire critique of the system itself.
So why does the author think the system is the actual problem? The argument isn't that these politicians are all just uniquely bad people. No, it's about the very structure they're working in. The article really leans on the work of economist Hans Hermann Hoppe to argue that the incentives baked into the democratic system are just fundamentally flawed.
And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures the core idea. The article frames its entire critique around the simple, gut-level concept. It just asks us to think about the difference in how you treat a car you rent for a weekend versus the car you actually own.
This brings us to the key idea, the politician as a renter. So unlike an old-school monarch who kind of owns the kingdom and has to think about his kids and grandkids, the article says a president with a fixed 6-year term has a totally rational reason to get as much as they can right now. Because hey, in 6 years, the country's problems, that's going to be someone else's headache.
So, what's the first big piece of evidence the article throws out for this renter mindset? The national debt. The article points out that, yeah, the Marcos dictatorship left a huge debt of $28 billion, but every single Democratic administration since has just kept on borrowing, pushing the grand total to over 15 times trillion pesos today. It's just a staggering number.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because this slide brings that massive number right down to a personal level. 15 trillion is just, it's impossible to wrap your head around. But the article breaks it down to about 130,000 pesos of debt for every single citizen. It argues that this is the direct result of politicians spending like crazy today and just leaving the bill for our kids and grandkids to pay.
You know, there's actually a name for this kind of thinking. It's called high time preference. The article uses this concept from Hoppe to explain that the system itself makes you focus on the now instead of the later. Politicians, they win votes with handouts and flashy projects today. The long-term consequences of all that debt, well, that's a problem for the next guy.
Okay, so the article's critique then goes from the economy to something way more explosive. It makes the claim that the post-EDSA era has actually been more violent than the martial law period it replaced. It calls it a state of total war, with the government basically fighting its own people.
And to back this up, the source lays out this grim catalog of violence. It points to specific events like the Mendiola and Hacienda Luisita massacres, the absolutely staggering death toll from Duterte's drug war. And on top of all that, you've got these persistent simmering conflicts like the half-century-long communist insurgency and the decades-old Moro conflict in the South.
This line from the article really just sums up the whole argument. The author's point is that, yeah, under a dictatorship, the enemy is clear. It's the state. But in their view, the democratic system has just pitted Filipino against Filipino in this constant, low-grade civil war over money, ideas, and power.
And the critique doesn't stop there. It goes even deeper, arguing that all this political and economic rot has sparked a cultural one too. The article uses this term decivilization to describe what it sees as a steady breakdown of the social fabric in the family, in the community, and in just how people talk to each other.
Now, what's so interesting here is how the article lays out these claims. It talks about this strange paradox of a country with strong family values that also has sky-high rates of family separation. It slams popular welfare programs for, in its view, creating dependency instead of solving poverty. It points to some really alarming stats among young people and complains about a political culture where, it argues, voters now prefer vulgarity over actual substance.
And once again, the article drives its point home with another one of these challenging questions. It asks if this whole situation is really the legacy that the heroes of the EDSA revolution imagined. And that question is the perfect setup for where we're going next, from just talking about the problems to actually proposing a solution.
So if the system's broken, what's the fix? Well, the article doesn't just complain, it proposes a pretty radical overhaul of the whole structure. It argues that the country needs to change the very machinery of its government. All right, so the solution they're pushing has two big parts: shifting from a unitary to a federal system and from a presidential to a parliamentary one. As you can see, the whole goal is to move from a system where all the power is stuck in Manila and accountability is low, to one where power is spread out and leaders can be kicked out fast if they mess up.
So why federalism? Well, according to the article, it all comes down to one thing: accountability. The author argues that if you let regions control their own money, local politicians can't blame Imperial Manila for their problems anymore. This, the article suggests, not only forces them to be responsible, but also sparks this healthy competition between regions to attract businesses and talent.
And the key benefit of a parliamentary system, according to the article, is how fast it can respond. A prime minister who loses the support of parliament can be removed, immediately, with a vote of no confidence. You don't have to wait 6 long years. This direct link between the person in charge and the legislature is pitched as this powerful check on any abuse of power.
So, all of this brings us to the article's big finish. It frames the situation not as a reason to give up, but as a moment to make a decision. A choice between sticking with the system the author says is a total failure, or being brave enough to build something new.
And this quote right here is really the heart of the final argument. The author is basically saying, hey, it's not just a choice between these two bad options. The whole point of the article is that there are other proven ways of running a country that could be adopted instead.
And finally, the article lays out this 5-step plan for anyone who's on board with this thinking. It starts simple: just stop pretending the system works. Then it says to actively demand these huge structural changes. It gets even more radical, suggesting that if reform fails, maybe supporting regional autonomy should be on the table. But that final point is maybe the biggest one of all. Stop treating this specific form of democracy as some sacred religion and start judging it on its results. So this explainer ends right where the article does, with a direct question not just to the reader, but to you. After laying out this nearly 40-year history of what it calls failure and proposing a radical new path, the author just leaves the final choice in our hands. What are we going to do? That is a challenging thought to end on. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so I want you to picture something. It's 1986. You have millions of people, millions, pouring into the streets in Manila.
A sea of people.
Totally. They're linking arms with nuns. They're literally facing down tanks. It is the textbook definition of a people's revolution. They overthrow a dictator, the world cheers, democracy is back. That's supposed to be the happily ever after moment, right?
That's the story we all know, yeah. The good guys won.
But then, you fast forward to today, it's almost 40 years later, and who's the president?
The dictator's son.
Dictator's son, who's in the Senate, his sister, the family is back in the palace, and the country is just drowning in debt.
Yeah.
So you have to ask the question, and it keeps people up at night. What happened? Was that revolution just a dream? Or is the whole system broken in a way we're not talking about?
It does feel like a glitch in the matrix, doesn't it? But today we are diving into a source that argues this isn't a glitch at all. It's a feature of the system.
A feature.
Yeah. We're doing a deep dive into a really provocative article called Democracy Hasn't Saved the Philippines, It's Killing It.
Whoa, that is a heavy title. Honestly, a little scary.
It's very heavy. And just a quick disclaimer before we really jump in here.
All right.
This isn't a political hit piece. We're not here to bash specific politicians or, take sides.
Right.
This source is actually doing a structural critique. It uses economic theory, and it draws really heavily on the work of an economist named Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Hoppe. I've heard the name. He's pretty controversial in some circles, isn't he?
Extremely, yeah. He's an Austrian economist, and he's known for arguing against democracy from a purely economic standpoint. The source uses his framework to make a really bold claim.
Which is?
That the specific brand of democracy in the Philippines, this unitary presidential system, is the actual root cause of the country's poverty, its corruption, and its debt.
So the argument is that democracy itself, or at least the way it's set up there, is the problem. That sounds, well, it sounds dangerous to even say out loud.
It does sound dangerous because we're all taught that democracy is the end goal.
Yeah.
The peak of civilization.
Yeah.
But the source asks us to just look at the incentives. Why does the Philippines feel stuck in this loop? And the answer, according to this text, it comes down to a really basic economic idea. The difference between a renter and an owner.
Okay, let's start there then. Renter versus owner. Break that down for me.
So Hoppe uses this great analogy. Imagine a king, a monarch. He owns the kingdom. It is his private property, his family's asset.
Okay.
Now, even if he's a terrible person, a total jerk, he has a built-in economic incentive to keep the kingdom valuable. Why?
Because he owns it. He wants to pass it on to his kids. You don't trash your own house.
Precisely. He has to take a long-term view. Now, compare that to a democratic politician. In the Philippines, a president gets a 6-year term. A mayor gets 3. They don't own the country. They're temporary caretakers. They're renters.
Ah, I see where this is going. If I'm renting a hotel room for a weekend, I am definitely not fixing the leaky faucet.
The source argues it's much worse than that. Because the politician knows their time is limited, they have an incentive to maximize their personal gain right now. The source uses this really vivid phrase. It says they have an incentive to strip the copper wiring.
Meaning loot the place before the lease is up.
Exactly. Sell the fixtures, pocket the budget, take the kickbacks, because in 6 years, the collapsing bridge, the failing schools, the massive debt, that's the next guy's problem.
So the source is saying corruption isn't just about a few bad apples. It's a rational economic choice for someone who's just renting power.
That's the core argument. It's a rational response to the incentives of the system.
That's a grim view of humanity. But it makes sense in terms of the timeline. If you know you're getting kicked out in 6 years, you grab what you can. And the source actually names names to back this up, doesn't it? It's not just a theory.
Oh, it does. It points to the big political dynasties as perfect examples of this renter behavior. It brings up the Aquinos and the Cojuangcos with Hasnt and Luisita. The argument there is that they didn't build that estate through, fair market competition. They inherited it and then used political power to keep it from being given to the farmers.
And it mentions the current president's family, too, I imagine.
Of course. The Marcoses in Ilocos Norte. The source describes them treating the entire province like a personal fiefdom. Or you have the Ampachuans in Maguindanao. These families, it argues, turn whole provinces into private kingdoms to extract as much wealth as possible, as fast as possible.
Why the rush, though?
Because the democratic system makes their hold on power temporary. It's contestable. They have to grab what they can while they can to fund the next incredibly expensive election.
So the system itself creates this constant, frantic urgency to steal. It's like a game of musical chairs where everyone's trying to steal the padding off the chairs before the music stops.
That is a perfect way to put it. And this short-term thinking, it leads to another concept from Hoppe that the source applies here: high time preference.
Okay, define that for me. High time preference. Is that like procrastination?
It's sort of the opposite of patience, really. Think of the famous marshmallow test they do with kids. You can have 1 marshmallow right now, or you can have 2 if you just wait 10 minutes.
Right. A kid with high time preference eats that 1 marshmallow instantly, no question.
Exactly. They value now way more than later. A prudent investor, an owner, has low time preference. They save and invest for the future. The source argues that democracy forces politicians to have high time preference.
They can't afford to wait.
They cannot save for 10 years from now because they might not be in office. They need to win votes today, so they spend money today.
And the bill that comes due eventually.
And that brings us to the debt. The numbers in the source are just staggering. So when Ferdinand Marcos Sr. fled in 1986, the national debt was $28 billion. The source calls that criminal for the time.
Okay, so that was the criminal benchmark. What is it today?
As of 2024, it's over 15 trillion pesos.
15. trillion.
which is about 60% of the country's entire GDP.
That's a number that's so big it's meaningless. What does that actually mean for, a regular person walking down the street in Cebu?
Well, the source breaks it down. It's about 130,000 pesos for every single Filipino, man, woman, and child.
Wow.
So a baby born today in a Manila hospital, before they even take their first breath, they effectively enter the world already owing the price of a small used car.
That is genuinely terrifying. And the argument is this all exists because politicians are buying popularity today with our grandchildren's money.
Correct. They build the flashy, unnecessary projects, they hand out cash, they put their names on every basketball court. It looks like progress, but it's really just mortgaging the future. And all this spending requires a massive government to manage it.
This is what the source calls the bureaucratic bloat, right?
Exactly. It calls it unlimited government. The 1987 Constitution was supposed to limit power to prevent another dictator. But the source argues it did the opposite. The government has metastasized.
How bad is it?
There are now 24 cabinet departments and over 400 government-owned and controlled corporations.
400? What are they all doing? That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
That's the question, isn't it?
Okay.
The source highlights the crazy redundancy. You have the DPWH building roads, but then the MMDA also builds roads, and the local government units build roads.
So everyone's building roads.
Right. You have the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Agrarian Reform, the DENR, the DTI, all of them running these overlapping programs.
It sounds like a jobs program for bureaucrats.
It is. But politically, that's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Every single one of those agencies is a bucket of resources a politician can hand out to their supporters. And that leads to the pork cycle.
Pork barrel politics.
Yep. Whether you call it CDF or PDAF or DAP, the function is the same. It's discretionary funds used to buy political loyalty. The source argues that instead of a limited government, democracy has created an unlimited machine for dispensing favors.
Okay, but I want to push back a bit here because, sure, debt is bad, corruption is bad, but the government does spend money on the poor. The source brings up the 4Ps program, the cash transfers. I mean, that's widely seen as a success story, isn't it? Helping the poorest of the poor.
And this is where the source gets really controversial and just directly challenges that mainstream view.
Okay.
It looks at the 4Ps, which supports, 4 million households? About 20 million people. And it argues that it's not a ladder out of poverty. It says it's a trap.
A trap. How is giving people money to survive a trap?
The argument is that it creates a permanent underclass of dependence. Think about it. If 20% of your population relies on a government check to eat, who are they going to vote for?
Whoever promises to keep the checks coming.
Of course. It locks them into a cycle of dependency on the state.
So it basically turns voters into political hostages. You vote for the incumbent or risk starving.
That is the grim implication.
Yeah.
And the source argues it actually changes the culture itself. It calls this outsourcing compassion.
That's an interesting phrase. Outsourcing compassion.
It is. Before this massive welfare state, the source says Filipinos relied on bayanihan.
Mutual aid, right. The community helping out.
Yes, families helping families, communities chipping in. It was personal, it was reciprocal. Now, compassion is bureaucratized. You pay your taxes so some stranger in an office can give a handout to someone you'll never meet. The source argues this just erodes the moral fabric of society. You stop looking out for your neighbor because you assume the government will do it.
Which connects to another point the source makes about decivilization. That sounds like something out of a zombie movie.
It's another hot term. Decivilization is the breakdown of the morals and rules that let society function. And the source points to the Filipino family as the prime victim.
But the Philippines is one of the only places on Earth with no divorce. On paper, the family is sacred.
On paper, yes. But the reality, as the source points out, is one of the highest rates of spousal abandonment in Asia. You have the whole OFW phenomenon, mothers leaving their children for years just to work abroad because the local economy, strangled by this renter system, can't provide jobs.
So you have a legal fiction of marriage, but a day-to-day reality of broken homes.
Exactly. And the source connects this family breakdown directly to urban decay. It paints this picture of slums in Manila, people literally living on garbage dumps, kids living in cemeteries. It's a society where the short-term view of the politicians has infected the culture itself. Nobody's building for the future. Everyone is just trying to survive today.
And the social decay, it has to spill into the streets.
Yeah.
The source challenges something I remember from college, this thing called democratic peace theory.
Right.
The idea that democracies are just inherently more peaceful, they don't fight other democracies, and they don't wage war on their own people.
Well, the source just says.
Yeah.
Look at the evidence in the Philippines. Since the restoration of democracy in 1986, has there actually been peace?
I mean, there are always insurgencies. There's always been conflict in the South.
It's more than that. The source calls it a state of total war. It argues that democracy creates this winner-take-all environment that just pits class against class, region against region.
And it lists specific examples.
Oh, yeah. The Mendiola massacre in '87, farmers shot while asking for land reform. The Hacienda Luisa massacre. The Mama Sapano debacle, where 44 police commandos died.
And, of course, the drug war. You can't not mention that.
Right. The source cites the conservative estimate of 30,000 dead. The argument is that democracy in the Philippines hasn't brought peace. It's just turned society into a battleground where different factions fight for control of the state machine. Because if you control the state, you control the money. So the fight for the state becomes a fight to the death.
And that totally affects how people vote. We end up voting on vibes, not on policy.
Vibes is the perfect word for it. The source argues democracy elevates popularity over actual competence. It points to the election of Joseph Estrada. Huge popularity, but, as the source argues, incompetent. It points to Duterte, who was elected because his crudeness resonated with people's anger.
And Bongbong Marcos.
Elected out of what the source calls nostalgia or forgetfulness.
It's a rejection of long-term logic. It's that high time preference thing again. I feel angry now, so I'll vote for the guy who screams. Or, I miss the good old days, so I'll vote for the name I recognize.
That's it exactly. So just to recap the problem here, we have a system that encourages looting, creates massive debt, traps the poor in dependency, fractures the family, and turns elections into popularity contests. It's a pretty bleak picture.
So is there a way out? Or does the source just say, well, good luck, maybe move? Because reading this, I felt like packing a bag.
No, it does offer a solution. But it warns that it requires a complete structural overhaul.
Yeah.
The force says we don't need to change the people, we keep changing the people, and we keep getting the same result.
We need to change the incentives.
We need to change the incentives.
Okay, so what's the fix?
2 big structural changes. First one, federalism.
We've heard politicians talk about federalism for years, but why federalism specifically in this economic context?
To break the Manila bottleneck. Right now, everything goes through Manila. Taxes from Davao flow to Manila. Decisions for a town in Cebu are made in a boardroom in Manila. The source argues this unitary system just cannot effectively govern 7,000 islands and 180 languages. It's impossible.
So how does federalism fix the renter problem?
It creates what are called competitive jurisdictions. Imagine if the Philippines was divided into, say, 10 or 12 states with real fiscal autonomy. They keep their own taxes, they make their own laws, they manage their own resources.
So if I'm the governor of a Visayan state, I don't have to go beg the president in Manila for money.
No. And more importantly, you have to compete. If your state in the Visayas lowers taxes and cuts red tape, businesses will move there from Manila. If a state in Mindanao is corrupt and inefficient, people and capital will leave. It forces politicians to be better because they can't hide behind national statistics anymore.
It's like introducing market competition to governance. If your product, your government is terrible, you go out of business. I like that. What's the second fix?
A shift to a parliamentary system.
Instead of a president?
Yes. The source argues the current presidency is basically a 6-year elected monarchy. Once a president is in, they're practically immune. They can fail, they can be corrupt, they could disappear for weeks at a time, but unless you have another revolution, you are stuck with them.
Impeachment is technically possible, but let's be real, it's a circus. It never works unless the military gets involved.
Exactly. But in a parliamentary system, the prime minister serves at the pleasure of the legislature. They have the vote of no confidence. If they mess up, if they lose the support of their own party, they can be removed.
Immediately. So there's no 6-year immunity. It makes them accountable day to day.
That's the theory. It also fuses the executive and the legislative, which basically ends the kind of gridlock we see now. The source points to Japan, Germany, the UK as better models. It argues this makes the government more agile. If a leader fails, you swap them out without burning the whole country down.
Okay. So federalism to break the central power, parliamentarism to break the immunity of the term limits. But let's be honest for a second. The people in power right now, the renters, they benefit from this system. They're not just going to vote to fire themselves.
And you've just hit the nail on the head. Constitutional reform is incredibly difficult when the very people who have to approve it are the ones profiting from the status quo. And this is where the source brings up what it calls the nuclear option.
I'm almost afraid to ask, what's the nuclear option?
This section.
Breaking up the country. Like, for real.
No.
The Philippines splitting apart.
The source argues that if Manila refuses to reform, if it continues to strangle the regions and drain their wealth, then the moral path is to support regions that want to leave. It specifically mentions Mindanao and the Visayas as possibilities.
Wow. That's extreme. That's bordering on treasonous talk in some circles.
It is.
Okay.
But it aligns with Hopp's theory that smaller political units are always better. If the central government is acting like a parasite, you detach the host. The source calls it the ultimate check on power. If Manila knows that Mindanao could actually leave, maybe Manila will start treating Mindanao a little bit better.
It's the ultimate leverage. Treat us as partners or we're moving out and taking our stuff with us.
That's exactly it.
So, to wrap this all up, the source basically gives you, the listener, a 5-step plan. Let me see if I can get this right because it's quite a ladder to climb.
Go for it.
Okay, step 1. Stop the nostalgia for 1986. Admit the system is broken and that the good guys didn't actually fix the underlying structure. Step 2. Demand federalism to decentralize power. Step 3. Push for a parliamentary shift to create real accountability. Step 4. Be prepared to support secession if the center refuses to reform.
And then there's step 5. This one is the most philosophical, I guess.
Okay, what's step 5?
Stop treating democracy as a religion. The source argues democracy is just a tool. Think of it like a hammer. If you have a hammer and every single time you swing it, the head flies off and hits you in the face. You don't worship the hammer. You don't say, I just need to swing it with more faith.
You get a new tool.
You get a new tool. The source asks, if this tool's been broken for 38 years and all it's created is debt, poverty, and corruption, are we loyal to the tool? Or are we loyal to the survival of the country?
That is a provocative place to end. It's basically asking if it's time to stop looking for a good president and start looking for a whole new operating system.
Or maybe, just maybe, start looking for political saviors altogether and start building systems that don't rely on angels to run them in the first place.
A lot to chew on there. It definitely makes you look at the daily news and the history books in a completely different light.
It certainly does. It's an uncomfortable perspective for sure. But sometimes you have to look at the ugly stuff to figure out how to actually fix the house.
Well, that's our deep dive for today. We'd love to know what you think. Is the system working for you, or is it time for that new tool? Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.